All of us have cancer cells in our bodies, but all of us also have a body designed to fight the process of tumor development.
We're going to discuss the things that you can do to strengthen your body's defenses against cancer. This is hard to believe. Hang on to your chairs. The woman who benefited from this basic health advice had a 68% reduction in mortality from breast cancer. This is a stunning number. It is so stunning that if this were a medication, first you would have heard about it, and second, it would probably be malpractice not to prescribe it. So my most sincere wish is that together we're contributing today to spreading this true hope. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here today with all of you. My name is Dr. David Servan-Schreiber, and welcome to Anti-Cancer. Together, we have an incredible opportunity to help spread a message of hope, that it is in our power to support our bodies so we avoid getting cancer in the first place, or if we already have cancer, that we can slow it down considerably. What I'm about to unfold for you here today is a story. This is the last picture that was taken of me 18 years ago, just a few weeks before my life turned around. I was a young university-based physician and neuroscientist. I had a very successful early career, which made me not only very ambitious, but a little bit arrogant as well. But 2 weeks later, I was running a brain scanning experiment at the University of Pittsburgh. And one evening, one of the subjects didn't show up. We didn't want to waste the precious scanner time, so we decided with my friends and colleagues that I would go into the scanner. I did that, and a few minutes later, my best friend, Jonathan, called me from the control room of the scanner and said, David, there's a problem. We're coming in. So he came into the room, he pulled me out of the machine, and he put his hand on mine, and he said, David, there's something in your brain, and we can't do the experiment. And that's how I learned with Jonathan that I had brain cancer. And a few weeks after that happened, of course, I got conventional treatment. This is what it looks like. Many of you know about that. And that conventional treatment saved my life. However, a few years later, as often happens with these kinds of tumors, I relapsed. And I had to have surgery a second time. I had to have chemotherapy, and I had to have radiotherapy, which again saved my life. But I understood that if I stuck with conventional treatment alone, I was very likely to get a conventional outcome only. And I wanted to hang on to something a little bit more positive than that. And I decided I would use my skills as a physician and as a scientist to find out everything I could in the scientific literature about how I could help my body above and beyond the conventional treatments so that I would make it to this very tail end of the survival curve. And the lessons I learned from the scientific literature is what I want to share with you today. One of the first lessons may seem a little strange, and it actually may seem a little depressing, but it's full of hope. The first lesson I learned, not being an oncologist, I was a neuropsychiatrist and neuroscientist. The first lesson I learned is that we actually manufacture cancer cells all the time. Our bodies make cancer cells all the time. So we all have cancer cells. We are also all exposed to cancer-promoting factors, carcinogens that are part of our environment. We're all exposed to that. You can't avoid it. So that's interesting. We all have cancer cells. We're all exposed to carcinogens. Yet only 1 in 4 of us, it's a lot of people, but it's only 1 in 4 of us, will die of cancer. Which means by definition that for 3 out of 4 people, there are some natural mechanisms in our bodies that prevent those cancer cells and those carcinogens from creating a dangerous disease. Obviously, my natural defenses had failed me. So I wanted to understand what happens that some natural defenses can fail, whereas at other times they work better. This here on the screen is the curve of the the progression of the number of cases of breast cancers in the US. You see that starting around 1940, these numbers have been growing steadily and at a very fast pace. Now, for a long time, when I was an academic physician, or even in medical school, we had been told that yes, the numbers of breast cancers are going up, but this is because the population is growing, so mathematically there's more cases of cancer. Population is getting older, and cancer is a disease of older age, therefore, by definition, there's going to be more cases of cancer. And finally, we're doing systematic screening now for cancer. We're going and looking for them. So that brings up the numbers. Therefore, the underlying message was, there's nothing to worry about. You know, this is all just normal. Don't worry about anything. But that turns out to not be true. These factors exist, and of course they do bring up the number of breast cancer in the country. But that accounts for roughly 50% of that increase. And the best proof that these explanations are not enough to account for why we have such rising rates of cancer is the cancer rates in children. We know that cancer rates in children have been going up by 1 to 1.5% per year for the last 30 or 40 years. And obviously children are not older, and we don't screen to detect cancer in children. So there is something happening to us which makes cancer rates go up, and it is not just that we're getting older or that we're screening. Another way to look at it is geographically. And this is really interesting. This is the result of a massive study that was done by the World Health Organization in the 80s, where they went to every country in the world, they took populations of the same age, and they used the same detection method to identify the rates of a variety of cancers. And the map you're seeing here is the map of breast cancer in the world at the end of the 1980s. The countries that are in red are the countries with the highest numbers of breast cancer. And what you see immediately on this map is that the countries that are most affected by breast cancers are Western European countries, United States, and Canada. So they're northern Western societies. When breast cancer affects the southern hemisphere, what you're seeing is that it's primarily all the way to the right and bottom of the screen in Australia and New Zealand. When it affects countries in South America, it's primarily Argentina and Chile. And interestingly, these are societies that have developed along the same kind of Western industrial lifestyle that we have over the last 50 years. In Africa, the only country that has some level of breast cancer is South Africa, which also has developed along Western industrialized lifestyle. In some region of rural China, the big green blob on the right of the screen here, in some regions of rural China, these investigators from the World Health Organization could not find any case of breast cancer. Now pause on this for a second. Think about the number of people around you that you know, number of women with breast cancer that you know, and think about a region of the world, massively populated, where you can't find any case of breast cancer. What is going on? Now it could be that Chinese women are genetically protected against breast cancer, right? But that's easy to find out. So somebody did this study. They looked at Chinese women in Shanghai, which is one of the large cities of China. And these are the yellow bars here. You see that by age group, the rates of breast cancer in Chinese women in Shanghai. And then the purple bars are Chinese women who've emigrated to San Francisco. So they have the same genetic makeup, but after 1 or 2 generations of living in California, Chinese women have the same rates of breast cancer as American women. Therefore, they're not protected by their genes. So, this brings up a very simple question. If cancer is going up since 1940 in northern Western societies, and specifically in our societies, what happened in 1940 in our societies? What have we been doing differently since 1940 in our societies that might explain this increasing rate of cancer? Many things changed in our way of life in the last 60 years or so. And we'll go over some of these things so we can understand them, so we can take action and fight them back. The first thing is nutrition. Our diet has changed completely in the last 60 years. The second factor that changed profoundly is chemical exposure. If you think about it, the first chemical pesticide that has been widely used in civilian agriculture is DDT. We're now exposed to an array of chemicals like never before in the history of mankind. The third factor is sedentarity. Now, why is that important? Because it turns out that physical activity has all kinds of profound consequences on the body's ability to fight a disease like cancer. And the last factor is social support. Now, this is also interesting. We know from every social study that one of the main factors that contributes to somebody's physical health is the density and quality of their social network. So that's a bit of an overview of what I found out about what factors are societally contributing to this cancer epidemic so that we can regain control over them. Let's look at some of the numbers because they're pretty impressive. Sugar. The consumption of refined sugars by Americans all the way back to the 1800s and until 2000. What you're seeing is that in the 1800s in this country, we ate about 12 pounds of refined sugar per person and per year. In 2000 in the US, we're now eating 154 pounds of refined sugar per person and per year. We went from 12 pounds to 154 pounds over the course of a single century. Now, I find that truly amazing and intriguing because if you take now a household of 4 people, say, 2 parents and 2 kids, that means 4 times that amount, which is more than 600 pounds of refined sugar that is going through the kitchen in 1 year, right? Somehow it has to get in the house to get into the people. 600 pounds. Now, who saw 600 pounds of refined sugar go through their kitchen or through their house in the past year? And some of you live in houses there are more than 4 people, right? So there's more than 600 pounds. You'd think you'd have noticed them. How could that have happened? Well, we've invented in the last 50 years remarkable vehicles for pouring sugar into people without them noticing the sugar. And let me do another little survey with you here so you understand it. When you go to a diner, if you ask for coffee, it always comes with little packets of sugar. You can put in your coffee or your tea or whatever, your iced tea, okay? Well, how many of these little packets of sugar would you put in, a cup of tea or a glass of iced tea before you think, I'm overdoing it, this is going to be too sweet? How many packets of sugar would you do? 3 here. I have 4 there. 3. Usually it's around 3. This gentleman likes sugar. But 4, you think it'd be too much, right? Okay, it's usually about that, about 3 or 4. Good. Now, do you know how many of these same little packets of sugar are in one 12-ounce can of soda, of pop? Do you know? I have 4 here. 9.
20.
16, 20.
12.
Yes, 12. Thank you very much. Exactly right. 12. So 12 packets of sugar in one can of soda. So the beauty about that is that people have soda with their meal. They don't even notice that there's sugar in it. It doesn't reduce your hunger, does it? Right? You still eat just the same amount. In fact, you still have dessert. In fact, some people have dessert in soda, right? put the ice cream in the soda, so they can have both together, right? And so you barely notice that you had all this sugar. Now, of course, this contributes to the diabetes epidemic and the obesity epidemic, but unfortunately, we now know, and it's a recent discovery, that all of this sugar contributes to cancer as well. Now, this is a study from 2009, so it's reasonably recent. It looks at women, and it looks at the amount of foods that bring sugar up in their blood, called food with a high glycemic load. It looks at the glycemic load of their diet. Okay, so that is concerning because as we went from 12 pounds of refined sugar per person and per year to 154 pounds of refined sugar per person and per year. And now we're seeing that it can roughly double the risk of getting breast cancer if there's more sugar in your diet. No surprise that in the same period that we vastly increased sugar, we also increased breast cancer. The second factor I want to talk about has to do with fats. And what you're seeing now on this image is an animation of what fatty acids, which are molecules of fat, look like inside the cell membrane of every one of your cells in your body. There are different kinds of fats. The green one that you're seeing that's a little agitated on your screen here is the so-called omega-3 fatty acid. It has very specific properties that are important. One of them is that it is amazingly flexible, as you can see. It's dancing all the time, and it gives flexibility to our cell membranes. It allows our cells to do things which they otherwise couldn't do if these weren't there. I like this omega-3 so much because it's so cute. You feel like you can pet it on the nose, don't you think? There are two kinds of fatty acids that our bodies need, but which it cannot manufacture. It cannot make them. And they're the so-called omega-3 fatty acids and the omega-6 fatty acids. If they're not in our plate, in our diet, they're not in our body because our body doesn't know how to make them. So why am I telling you about this? Well, it's really important because it turns out that these omega-6s and omega-3s have very different consequences once they're in the body. The omega-6 fatty acid, it turns out, raise inflammation in the body, and they remember those words, they stimulate cell growth. Omega-6 fatty acids stimulate cell growth. And what can grow in an adult body indefinitely? The only two kinds of cells that can indefinitely be stimulated to grow in an adult body are fat and cancer. Omega-6 fatty acids stimulate cell growth and raise inflammation. On the other end, my little green guy here, the omega-3 fatty acids, actually reduce cell growth and reduce inflammation. They regulate inflammation. The trouble arises when there's an imbalance in our diet. And this is exactly what we did to ourselves. What I'm showing you here is the consumption of soybean oil in the United States, which is full of omega-6 fatty acids. Per person and per year again, you see that something starts with World War II, right, 1940, and then almost an explosion of the consumption of these kinds of oils. Why? Because they're in every industrial food that we eat. They're very convenient oil, they're very cheap as well, and they're part of all of the industrial foods people don't prepare at home, but you buy ready-made, are made with these kinds of oils. So there's another reason, which is this, and it's even more sad. This is the modern farm in America. It's called an industrial feedlot. I was raised in part on a farm in Normandy, and it didn't look anything like that. Had rolling hills, and the color, the dominant color of the farm in Normandy was green. That's right. Where do you see the green here, aside from the tags on the poor cow's ears? There is no green in the modern feedlot. Why is that? Because instead of eating grass, these animals are eating only corn and soy. Why is that even relevant? Why should we worry about that? Well, because it turns out that grass is filled with omega-3 fatty acids, and corn and soy are filled with omega-6 fatty acids. So what happens? When these animals no longer eat grass and eat corn and soy, the meat that comes from cows is filled with what? With omega-6 fatty acids. The milk that comes from these cows, omega-6 fatty acids. Butter, cheese, cream, and of course the same applies to our hens. Hens on the farm in Normandy used to feed in the grass. You do pick seeds, pick grass, eat worms, and their eggs were filled with omega-3 fatty acids. When you feed hens with corn and soy, the omega-3s disappear from the eggs. Let me show you that this has important consequences. And the most obvious one, as I told you, remember omega-6s stimulate cell growth. The only cells that can grow in an adult body are fat and cancer. Indefinitely, it can grow indefinitely. This is the map of obesity in America in 1985 as established by the Center for Disease Control. You're seeing the light blue states are states where there's less than 10% obesity. We're talking obesity, not just a little overweight. We're talking about people have trouble walking, getting up steps and staircases and so on, right? That's a BMI over 30 for those of you who know the medical term, a body mass index over 30. Light blue, less than 10%. Slightly darker blue is between 10 and 15%. This is the map of obesity in 1985 in America. Now I want to show you what an epidemic looks like. The epidemic of obesity in this case. 1985, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91. The first states with more than 15%, when we were now 15 to 20%, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97. The first states with more than 20% obesity are in light orange. 98, 99, 2000, 2001. The first states with more than 25%, more than 1/4 of the people have obesity above 30. That's 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005. The first states with more than 1/3 of the people obese. 2006, 2007, 2008. This is what the epidemic looks like. Now remember that obesity turns out to be one of the leading risk factors for cancer. Of course, you don't get cancer as soon as you become obese. There's a lag time, just like there is with smoking. You might get cancer 10 years later, for example. So this may be the map of cancer in our country in 10 years, which is a pretty scary perspective. One of the first concepts we need to understand draws the line and brings the parallel between classical or conventional oncology and integrative oncology. What most of cancer medicine has been doing for the last 50 years has been to try to destroy cancer cells, destroy the tumor. Now, obviously, this is a good thing, and I'm very happy that they took this tumor out of my brain on 2 occasions, and that we did chemotherapy and we did radiotherapy, and I hope that we killed as many of these cancer cells as possible. This is a very important thing to do. However, cancer is a bit like a plant or a weed. It needs a soil, a terrain to grow in. And at the same time that you try to destroy the weed, you can also work with the terrain, with the soil, to make it as inhospitable as possible to cancer growth. So let's look at how we do that. First of all, I want to show you something, because people hear about the immune system and natural defenses and they never see it. This is a small tumor growing inside a body, as happens a lot. These are cancer cells. And what you're seeing here, the blue blobs, are immune system cells, natural killer cells, that are capable of detecting and destroying those cancer cells. It is when those defenses fall apart that the tumor can have free range to grow, invade neighboring tissue, and go to other distant parts of the body, as in metastasis. So let me show you what happens when we don't impair our natural defenses and when they actually are in a position to do their job the way they want to do. This study is a study of about 50,000 people where they were followed for 14 years. And the researchers looked at what kind of health behaviors did they have in their lives. And they look at 4 simple health behaviors, because if you do these things, you're actually not impairing your natural defenses. You're letting them do their work. The 4 health behaviors were not smoking, not drinking more than 2 alcoholic beverages per day, eating 5 fruits and vegetables per day, and having the equivalent of 30 minutes of walking 5 or 6 days a week. Now, look at the results. It's pretty stunning. These are survival curves we're looking at. The red line is the survival curve of people who did none of the 4. None of the 4. And you see that they started dying. And that after 14 years, there were fewer of these people, many fewer than when it started. The green line are the people who did one of the 4 behaviors, whichever one it was. And they don't die nearly as much. They're protected to some degree from dying. The dark blue line are the people who did 2. The pink line, people who did 3. And the light blue line, the people who did all 4 health behaviors. The people who did all 4 health behaviors had 4 times less of a risk of being dead after 14 years than those who did 0. 4 times less of a risk. This is a pretty striking number. And what is really interesting is that this worked for all kinds of causes of mortality. I mean, we all know, and we've been told, and this is now ingrained in our brains, that you can protect yourself from heart disease if you don't smoke, you have physical activity and you eat properly, that this will protect you against heart disease and heart death. And indeed, in that study, it protected people against cardiovascular death. However, the protection against cancer was almost the same. Even though we're always told, cancer has more to do with your genes than with what you do, well, not so. In this study, those health behaviors protected people almost as much against cancer as it did against heart disease. The other study that I want you to know about, which has gotten very little attention, even though it is a striking result, now doesn't have to do with prevention. I was just talking to you about prevention of cancer. This has to do with prevention of relapse. So this is in women who already had breast cancer stage 2 or 3. These women went through treatment, and after treatment, well, I'm sure many of you in this room know, and many who are watching us know, after treatment, if you're like me, you go to your doctor and you say, well, now, doc, we did all this. It wasn't that much fun, but it was important. We did it. Now, what do I do so it doesn't come back? Because if I could avoid doing chemotherapy again, I would much prefer that. If that's an option, I'd sign now for that option. So what can I do so it doesn't come back? And 99.9% of patients get a standard answer, which is go back to your life as usual. Do what you like to do. There's nothing you can do to prevent cancer from coming back. We'll just do tests on a regular basis, and if it were to come back, we would catch it earlier, and we'll decide at that point what kind of treatments we use. This is what most people hear. Certainly this is what I was told. I actually thought this was unacceptable. It makes no sense that you can't do anything to help your body be more protected against cancer. It makes no sense. I mean, you almost have to have gone through brainwashing in medical school to think that nutrition has no impact on whether a body resists cancer or is more likely to get cancer. Obviously, the food you eat every day, 3 times a day, has to have an impact. So tell me, what should I eat? It was the first question, right? Now, in this study, half of the group of women after treatment for breast cancer were told, go back to your life as usual, and this is what they did, and that's the control group. The other group benefited from about a year of meetings where they got to learn about things they could do to help themselves in their lives to be healthier. No great promise was attached to that because the research hadn't been done, but at least we knew this would make them healthier. Number 1, eating differently, more healthily. Number 2, having more physical activity in their lives. Number 3, they learn a basic breathing and concentration technique for stress management, which is the first thing you learn in a yoga class. And number 4, they learned how to reach out to their friends to get help when the times were tough. Just 4 basic things. Now, this is hard to believe, and hang on to your chairs. But at the end of 11 years of follow-up, after they were done with that 1 year where they learned how to do things, the women who benefited from this basic health advice had a 68% reduction in mortality from breast cancer compared to the other group that did not get the advice. 68% reduction in mortality. This is a stunning number. It is so stunning that if this were a medication, first you would have heard about it, and second, it would probably be malpractice not to prescribe it to women who've been through breast cancer. Because it is not a medication. We've barely heard about this study, and very, very few oncologists have heard about it or recommend it. This is the kind of thing that we can no longer tolerate, and that has to change. How is that possible? How can such reduction in mortality be achieved? Well, let's talk a little bit about foods, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about the role of foods in disease in general and in cancer in particular. You need to know that 60% of modern cancer medicines originally derived from a plant-based molecule, which was thought to have anti-cancer activity. It turns out that foods, like everything else in nature, are made of molecules, of course. And some of these molecules have been identified as potent anti-cancer agents. What you're seeing on the screen is a study published in Nature in 2003. Nature is one of the most renowned scientific journals. And it looked at a variety of foods with well-characterized and identified molecules that had anti-cancer properties. So for example, it includes green tea with its catechins, or the famed EGCG, which you may have heard about or not, which is one of the key molecules in green tea that is capable of killing cancer cells and of preventing the blood vessels around tumors to grow. And tumors need to grow blood vessels to become larger. If the EGCG prevents that from happening, tumor has a harder time growing. So that's one of the molecules. There's the lycopene of tomato and so on. So these are well-identified molecules in foods that have anti-cancer properties. And a researcher at the University of Montreal did something absolutely incredible in the late 80s and 90s and early 2000s. He had for many, many years, decades in fact, he'd been studying promising chemicals that could become anti-cancer pharmaceuticals. And what he did for that in the lab, he had the colonies of cancer cells, and he would put a drop of a pharmaceutical to see if it would prevent the cancer cells from growing. And then if it did, then the idea was to test it in animals to see if it was bearable, or if it was such a poison that you would kill the animal before it killed the cancer cells. And 90% of these drugs that he found were effective against cancer were too poisonous to be used as drugs. But sometimes they would find one. And when he read these articles in Nature about the power of green tea and other plant-based molecules, he had the idea of buying a new piece of equipment for his $40 million lab. He bought a juicer. And he started juicing vegetables. And then he would take a drop of garlic juice or spinach juice or beetroot juice and put that in the dish of cancer cells to see what happens. And he got unbelievable results. I'm going to show you one of them here. This may be a little hard to see, but what you're seeing, this is a colony of colon cancer cells. And on top, you're seeing the effect of the inhibition of cancer cell growth by a drop of garlic. 100% inhibition. It completely blocked the growth of the cancer cells in the dish. Same thing happened with leeks, scallions, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, beets, spinach, kale, and so on. Now, what's interesting is that it's not just putting a drop of anything, because when he put a drop of cucumbers or red peppers or carrots, he got much less of an effect. So in fact, he was in a position to start to look at different types of cancer. So we take brain and breast and colon and kidney and lung, and test different vegetables against different cancers and see which ones were most effective for what, which was a brand new area of research. And that raised an interesting question, which is, none of us, in their right mind at least, eat only garlic, right? Actually, even if it helped with cancer, I don't know if you would do it, because you would have other problems, including social problems. So we don't do that. So the question arises, what happens when you mix foods, which is how we eat? Does it still work? Or do you lose the benefit? Because in the colony of cells, he would put just a drop of spinach or a drop of garlic, but nobody eats just spinach or just garlic. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, and this is the beauty of nature. Actually, this is a recent study, I think 2009. It looked at women in China. It had been known for some time that a lot of the mushrooms that they eat in China have anti-cancer properties. And indeed, the women in China who eat mushrooms 3 times a week have a 50% reduction in the risk of getting breast cancer. Now, other studies had shown that women who drink 3 cups of green tea per day also have about a 50% reduction in the risk of getting breast cancer. And this study, they looked at what happens to women who do both. See, if they just eat mushroom 3 times a week, you see 45 or 50% reduction in breast cancer. If they eat mushrooms 3 times a week and they drink 3 cups of green tea a day, you see an 89% reduction in the risk of them developing breast cancer, which is a stunning number. So these benefits actually seem to combine. Not only that, but they seem to potentiate each other, which is truly remarkable and a good news, because we mix these things in the way we live and eat. So that's very important. So now let's turn to what's the typical anti-cancer diet or anti-cancer plate. And the first thing to know about the anti-cancer plate, the typical plate or typical diet, is that it's the reverse of the typical American plate. What's the American national dish? Hamburger and French fries, right? Now, you know that red meat has been identified by oncologists for a long time as being one of the worst promoters of particularly colon cancer. but probably contributes to a variety of other cancers, especially, unfortunately, for what we all like, especially when it's barbecued, which is bad news, because we all sure like that. But anyway, red meat, major factor in the promotion of cancer. Second, the vegetable we put with it, French fries, it's made of potatoes. And it turns out that potatoes actually bring up blood sugar, much like sugar does, or like bread does. So it is one of the only vegetables that has very little anti-cancer activity. Then we take that potato that has no anti-cancer activity and which brings up blood sugar, and we dip it in omega-6 oil, right? Then we fry the oil so that it sucks up all our antioxidant defenses in our body. And then we make that our national dish. Now, you'd think that it was the Defense Department that made this like the national dish for another country that they want to get rid of, you know? But no, we did this to ourselves. Now, the anti-cancer national dish is the other way around. It's, in fact, much closer to what a Vietnamese national dish is, called the pho, which is a soup of plenty of vegetables with a little bit of thinly sliced meat on top of it to add taste. But the core of the dish is the vegetables. 80% vegetables, maybe a little bit of animal protein on top, but mostly vegetables. This is how we need to change our perspective. 80% vegetables, a little bit of animal protein or meat if we like it, which is not indispensable. In fact, a lot of the protein in a strong anti-cancer diet comes from these. From beans. Beans are full of protein. They're also full of fiber. They don't bring up blood sugar. And they provide you all the protein that you might be getting from meat. In fact, for a long time, a very common dish in this country, especially in the South, was rice and beans. Now, why rice and beans? It's interesting because beans actually don't have all of the amino acids to make up for the protein that is in meat, for example. But if you combine it with rice, especially here brown rice, which doesn't bring up blood sugar nearly as much as white rice, if you combine beans and rice, you get the perfect mix of all amino acids that makes up the same kind of protein that you might get from meat. So you can live forever on rice and beans. I don't know that it's the most exciting food to have every day, 3 times a day, but it certainly is enough to be sustaining. Other sources of proteins in the vegetable kingdom is soy. So this is tofu here. And tofu is an excellent source of vegetable protein. In the Mediterranean diet, which is an almost perfect anti-cancer diet, there's a great trick that was discovered many, many centuries ago. The Romans were doing it already, is to cook almost every dish with garlic and onions. It turns out that garlics and onions have these sulfurous compounds that have a variety of fascinating properties. For one thing, they tend to be antiviral and antibacterial. In fact, during World War II, the American soldiers had, for the first time in their history of war, penicillin to treat their wounds, which prevented gangrene, which was phenomenal. But the Russians didn't have that. What did the Russians do? They did what soldiers during World War I did. They would spread garlic on their wounds to prevent them from getting infected. And it was called the Russian penicillin. So it has antiviral and antibacterial properties. Not only that, but it reduces the rise of blood sugar when you do eat sugar, which is a beautiful property of garlic. It stimulates your immune system cells, the natural killer cells we looked at, makes them more aggressive against a variety of cancer cells. It's an amazing property of garlic and onions. And for some cancer lines, it actually kills them directly, as we saw in its capacity of limiting cancer growth in the lab. So the invention of Mediterranean cooking about 2,000 or 3,000 years ago was to include garlic and onions with everything you eat, except dessert, but practically everything else. Right? So when you cook vegetables, if you cook meat, if you cook fish, if you make pasta, make sure that you've cooked a little garlic and onion, and you can fry it in a little bit of olive oil. The only acceptable kind of oils for cooking are olive oil and canola oil. Why is that? Because a lot of you may have, you can go back to your kitchen tonight, look at your kitchen cabinet and look for that corn oil and soybean oil and sunflower oil. This is packed with omega-6 fatty acids. So you might want to, I was going to say give it to your neighbor, but that wouldn't be a very friendly, very friendly, I live part of the time in Pittsburgh, and this is where Mr. Rogers had his show. He would not have approved of me saying that. So do not give your omega-6 oils to your neighbor. You can't give them to your friends or your kids or anyone, so just get rid of them. And replace them with, the best oils for cooking is olive oil. For salad dressing, you can use olive oil. You can also use canola oil, or you can use flaxseed oil, which is packed with omega-3s. This is the richest vegetal, plant-based source of omega-3 fatty acids. It's flax seeds and flaxseed oil. Okay, olive oil does not have omega-3s, but it doesn't have omega-6s, and it has plenty of polyphenols and antioxidants that have their own health-promoting benefits. When you do that, when you use olive oil and you're frying your garlic and onion, I would strongly encourage you to consider this powder. I don't know if you know about this powder. This intense yellow or orange powder is turmeric. This is the yellow spice that is in curry. The reason curry is often yellow is because 1/5 of curry is turmeric. Turmeric is one of the oldest medicine in Ayurvedic medicine. It is the most powerful natural anti-inflammatory compound that we know. And people who eat turmeric on a regular basis, and you don't have to use that much, maybe half a teaspoon like this, 3-4 times a week. People who eat turmeric on a regular basis have much less of the common inflammatory disorders such as arthritis, but also heart disease, Alzheimer's, and cancer. So the regions of the world where people use turmeric on a regular basis, such as India, and also North Africa, Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, Lebanon, have much less of these disorders. And it is now, it has been identified as one of the most powerful plant-based anti-cancer compound, which is being tested at MD Anderson Cancer Center in protocols for prostate cancer together with chemotherapy, because it's thought to, for some chemotherapies, potentiate them. Doesn't work for all of them. For some chemotherapies, I can actually interfere with them because it is a powerful compound. So you need to discuss it with your doctor before you start. If you're taking chemo, be careful and discuss it with your doctor. If you're not taking chemo, I would say you can go ahead. It's only likely to help by reducing inflammation, and it helps kill a variety of cancer cells directly. So at least cook with turmeric. You can never hurt yourself if you're cooking with it. If you're taking gulps of it, it doesn't taste that great, so it's unlikely you'll be doing it. Then you could hurt yourself. But if you're cooking with it, putting in a little bit of oil, always put black pepper on top of it, because black pepper multiplies by 200 the ability of the body to absorb turmeric. So if you don't put pepper, it might just wash through. Put black pepper with it. And cook tofu. Now I've just given you a perfect tofu recipe. Olive oil, turmeric, garlic, onion, black pepper. Slice the tofu, put that in there in the skillet, fry it a little bit, and saute, and you'll have a perfect tofu dish. And you'll think about me tonight when you do that, because it actually tastes fantastic. Now, this is for the main dish. Now, most vegetables are excellent. The tomatoes, all these brightly colored vegetables, tomatoes, red pepper, orange pepper, carrots contain beta-carotene, which is a powerful antioxidant. It is also an anti-cancer agent. The tomatoes also contain lycopene. This is what gives color to the vegetables. So the brightly colored vegetables will have those compounds, which not only are antioxidant, but also can contribute to killing cancer cells directly. There are good studies showing that men with prostate cancer, for example, if they eat tomato sauce, and it works better if it's tomato sauce as opposed to just a raw tomato, because cooking the tomato in olive oil will bring out the lycopene and brings up the concentration. So when people eat more tomato sauce of that kind, have slower growing prostate cancer. And in fact, you're going to like this. There are some studies in Italy showing that men who eat more pizza. Now wait a minute, because it's not quite the pizza you're thinking about. But the men who eat more pizza have a lower rate of a variety of cancers. Now the pizza they eat has a lot less cheese, has a thin crust, and a lot of tomato sauce. So the reason it's believed to be helpful is it's because it's a healthy pizza. You know, it's not if your pizza is layered with a thick layer of cheese and a ton of meat on top of it, and it no longer works. This is a pizza with mostly it's an excuse to get tomato sauce into your body. But you can make your own tomato sauce. You can buy tomato sauce. Eat it. Broccoli is probably the king of anti-cancer vegetables. This and cauliflower and cabbage. We have Brussels sprouts here as this tinny, baby cabbage. Eating this will stimulate your liver enzymes that get rid of chemical compounds in your body that could be dangerous. So eating this 2 or 3 times a week will actually make a big difference. It doesn't have to be broccoli every time, but it could be cauliflower, it could be cabbage. Same recipe: olive oil, garlic, onion, turmeric, black pepper. Remember black pepper, okay? And then throw in the broccoli or the cabbage or whatever. Stir fry it. Put tofu with it if you want. And perfect dish, less than 30 minutes. I don't do anything that takes more than 30 minutes. And it works. Now, fish. Fish is also good. Salmon is good. The best fish, my favorite, is sardines. Sardines, I see some people going, well, you're wrong. You're just wrong. Sardines canned in what kind of oil? Good for you, olive oil. Sardines in olive oil. Why is sardines a perfect fish? It's very rich in omega-3 fatty acids. Salmon is as well, but salmon is a bigger fish. Sardines are smaller fish and they don't live as long. Why is that important? Because they don't accumulate contaminants. The bigger the fish, the more contaminants you'll be getting, which is why the FDA today tells pregnant women to not eat shark or swordfish because of all the contaminants in them that could actually damage the fetus. And they're now saying do not eat tuna fish more than once a month. Tuna is reasonably contaminated as well. So the smaller the fish, sardines, perfect fish. The more you get the omega-3s without the contamination. But salmon is still good. And how can you cook salmon? Let me guess. Skillet, olive oil. That's right. Remember the pepper. And here you go. You're rolling. Perfect. If you like potatoes, the bad news is I told you potatoes actually bring up blood sugar. So it's not a very good vegetable in that respect. The perfect alternative are these, yams or sweet potatoes, which actually taste sweet, but they don't bring up blood sugar. So switch potatoes. There's also one brand of potato which is not always easy to find called Nicola potatoes, and they actually taste like regular potatoes, but they don't bring up blood sugar for some strange reason. They have less starch in it, I'm not sure. Another great trick of Mediterranean cooking. Do you know what this is? Thyme, absolutely. So if you go to Greece or Corsica or the south of France, you get these smells everywhere you go. What is this one? Rosemary. Absolutely. Extremely fragrant herbs. Now, these are beautiful. So not only they enliven your cooking, you can, that recipe we just talked about before, just add this to it, okay? And they bring life to your cooking. Not only that, but they contain terpenes and carnosol, which are molecules that also will stimulate your immune cells to go after cancer cells more aggressively. And for some of them, will actually kill cancer cells directly. Like the carnosol of rosemary has been found to penetrate the brain and penetrate brain tumor cells and actually be able to kill them. So it doesn't work as well as chemotherapy. Again, I don't want to confuse you about that. Don't give up chemotherapy and say, okay, I'm just going to eat rosemary every day now. It's not going to do the same thing. But it can help, it can contribute, and it has very strong antioxidants. Probably one of the reasons why this Mediterranean diet has consistently been found in every study that looked at it to profoundly enhance health. And this is what you want to do when you have cancer or when you want to avoid cancer. You want to nourish life inside of your body. Nourish life in every way you can. And this is the best way to defend yourself. Now, the really bad news about all of this, so far it looks pretty good. Oh, bread, let me say, this is good news still. Bread. All of us like bread. I was born French and I love bread. So this is part of the culture. The problem is bread, especially the French bread, the baguette, but also the American bread, the flat, square. I've never seen this before. I left France for America and I didn't know that you could make bread like this. It's all square, flat and mushy. Didn't know. But you can, apparently. Well, that kind of bread will shoot up your blood sugar as soon as you eat it. So you need to switch from that kind of bread to a bread that doesn't do that. And the bread that doesn't do that is a bread that will mix up a variety of different cereals, not just wheat. This is the perfect bread. This is whole grain, multi-cereal bread. It's also organic, it turns out, which is good because the pesticides are on the cover of the grain. So if you're going to eat whole grain, it's better to get organic to avoid the pesticides. And this does not bring up blood sugar nearly as much. And you get to be able to eat some bread. Same thing for pasta. The great trick you need to know about pasta that is really important is that pasta is okay as long as it's cooked like Italians used to cook it for thousands of years, which is al dente. What does that mean? Al dente means it's still a little bit crispy. So it's slightly undercooked, if you will. When pasta is al dente, it takes the body longer to digest through it and bring up blood sugar. So it doesn't make blood sugar shoot up, and then you don't have that problem with inflammation or stimulation of cell growth that comes from rising blood sugar. So cook pasta al dente. Think about what happens when you overcook pasta. It becomes a mush, right? And that mush is like almost raw sugar. So you don't want to do that. Make sure you cook it al dente. And if possible, get pasta with multiple grains in it, not just one. Right? And whole grain pasta is even better. This won't raise blood sugar nearly as much. So you get to eat pasta, so you can thank me. One of the perfect foods is lentils. Very underused in our country, in the US. Very well known in North Africa, Lebanon and so on. Lentils. Very easy to cook. Full of minerals and vitamins and proteins. And none of the problems that arise from meat. So go ahead and learn a few lentil recipes. That you just boil them in water for about 20 minutes. And it's not terribly difficult, but you need to know what to mix them with so that it's really delicious. Now, let me get to the bad news. The bad news is dessert. Where you don't see much cake on my anti-cancer plate here. Why is that? Because you don't want to raise blood sugar, right? And dessert tends to come with sugar and white flour, right? And butter, omega-6 butter. So these are all things you want to avoid. So there's not much dessert left here. What is left is the dessert that is typical of the Mediterranean diet, which is what? Which is fruit. So you can have as much fruit as you want. In fact, the citrus family of fruits also contains a variety of polyphenols and molecules that will, for some of them, like the skin of tangerines, contains a plant-based chemical that will, again, penetrate the brain, penetrate brain cancer cells, and actually help kill them. Now, if you're going to peel the skin of tangerines to put into your food, which adds a lot of zinc to it, and it's really delicious, make sure they're organic, because otherwise you're peeling the pesticides with it. So get tangerines. Some of the ones that have the best anti-cancer properties are the berries, the red berries, strawberries, raspberries. The blueberries are wonderful, although it gets a little bit expensive. One trick about dessert that helps a lot of people is that dark chocolate is actually okay because it contains a number of antioxidants and polyphenols that also help stimulate the immune system and reduce oxidation and inflammation, but only if it is dark and more than 70% cocoa. If you can go up to 85% cocoa, it gets a little bit more bitter, but it's even better for you. The advantage of chocolate is that even by eating about a fifth of not the candy bar, because it's just the bar of dark chocolate, but if about a fifth or 2 large squares is enough to give you a sense that you had dessert, to stop your hunger. And satisfied your sweet tooth. So chocolate is a great trick. If you want to impress friends with an anti-cancer dessert that can be served at a dinner you're hosting, you can go all out and get fruits such as pear, for example, slice them, put them in the oven a little bit so they get even more tender. And then you can nape them with melted dark chocolate. And you can add a little bit of ginger to that. Ginger has many of the same properties as turmeric. You can grate a little ginger on your fruit and melted dark chocolate, and it makes for an excellent dessert. But for the most part, we have to learn to live with less sugar in our lives. There's no way around that. For the longest time, most people have been thinking that food can't be that relevant to cancer because cancer is mostly a matter of genes, right? It turns out that this is a myth. It's an enormous misconception. Every oncologist you'll talk to, every researcher you'll talk to, will tell you that at most 15%, that's 15% of cancers have some contribution from genetics. At most 15% have some contribution from genes. This is a study about women who have those breast cancer genes, BRCA1 and BRCA2. Now this is very scary to them because it is known that a woman who has these genes has 80% chance to develop breast cancer in her lifetime. 80%. That's a lot. In fact, it is so much that many of these women decide to have a bilateral mastectomy preventively. So if they don't have breasts, they have much less of a chance to get breast cancer. But that's a pretty harsh thing to do to one's body, right? So as to not get cancer. Where it gets really interesting is when you're looking at a study like this one, which was done from researchers in Montreal, where they look at women with BRCA1 and BRCA2 breast cancer genes. And then on the left, you're looking at the women who are not eating vegetables. And so these women have an 80% chance of getting breast cancer. Then the next bar are the women with those same genes who are eating a small amount of vegetables on a regular basis. Already they have about only a 50% chance of getting breast cancer. Then the next bar are the women who are eating a moderate amount of vegetables. They're roughly around 40% chance of getting breast cancer. And then the last one are the women who are eating a large amount of vegetables on a regular basis. And they're down to about 20% chance of breast cancer. So you can reduce the risk of getting breast cancer even if you have the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes by 73%. Now this is really interesting because what does it say about those genes? Are these breast cancer genes or are they fast food intolerance genes? And the same thing happens with men, of course. This is a study of a kind of gene that will increase the risk of a man of getting an inflammatory aggressive prostate cancer by a factor of 5.5. So they're about 550% times more likely to get an inflammatory aggressive prostate cancer. Now, if these men eat fatty fish with omega-3 fatty acids, fatty fish twice a week, even you would do it with sardines. Twice a week. If they eat sardines twice a week, or mackerel, or even salmon, then their risk of getting inflammatory prostate cancer comes back to that of the normal population. It completely cancels out the genetic factor. Just eating fish twice a week, and their so-called cancer genes go away. Were they prostate cancer genes? Or were they, I need my fish genes? Now this raises very interesting questions about the whole focus that we've been having in cancer research on looking at genetics. In reality, we should be looking at how lifestyle factors come in and make our genes act one way or another, because this is what is happening. One more lifestyle factor that we haven't gone over enough, and I'll go over this briefly, is physical activity. So I'm going to ask you to indulge me, and we're going to do a little poll together so we get a sense of how our relationship to physical activity has changed over the last 60 years. I'd like you to raise your arm and keep your arm up if your grandparents walked more than 15 minutes to go to school every day. Good for you. Look at that. Wow. So look around, it's practically everybody in the room. Good, you can bring your arm down. Now we're going to do the same thing, and I'm going to ask you to bring your arm up and keep it up if your kids who are less than 12 years old walk more, or grandkids, walk more than 15 minutes to go to school every day? Well, we have this one person has children, less than 12, who walk to school, and it takes them more than 15 minutes. Thank you very much. That gives you an idea of how profoundly our relationship to physical activity has changed over the past 60 years. Physical activity has the capacity to clean out the contaminants that accumulate in our fat cells, so it's a form of detoxification for the body. It also has the capacity to stimulate the immune system. People who do moderate exercise have fewer colds, fewer episodes of the flu, and so on. And it can regulate the rises of blood sugar. Now, let's look at what happens. Here's a study of women who had breast cancer, and we're looking at their risk of a relapse of breast cancer. On the left, you're seeing women who don't do any particular kind of physical activity, and this is their risk of relapse of breast cancer. Then the next bar are the women who do some physical activity, a little bit. Already there's a reduction in their relapse risk. Then the best they can do is moderate physical activity, which means 30 minutes of walking 6 times a week, have a reduction of their risk of breast cancer relapse of 50%. Now this is an enormous number. We have shown you what you can do to help you strengthen your body's defenses against cancer. But cancer is not only about broccoli and jogging. As anyone who's been through it knows, it's a searing inner journey. It questions everything you thought you knew about yourself and about the people around you. For a lot of people who've been diagnosed with cancer, there's a major question that arises, which is, did I bring this onto myself? Did I do something, somehow, that helped this disease creep into my life? Does it have to do with my divorce 5 years ago? Is it that accident that happened to the kids? Is it this problem I had at work when I lost my job? Did I do something? This is a tough question, and in fact, there's been a fair amount of research that has looked at it. And what most oncologists will tell you today, I think, is an interesting answer. They look at studies like this one, where people have examined women over a period of many years, and they did this before they knew that they would get cancer. So all these women were in good health, and they measured whether they'd had a major stressor in their life or not. So you see here on the left, you have women with no stress, and you notice they had to go to Finland to find some. Well, I think what that means is just women with no major stressor in their life at that point. And then women with a moderate stressor, and then the women with a severe stress. And what you see is when you follow them over the years, whether they had a severe stress or not makes no difference in terms of whether they will develop breast cancer or not. And this is one study I'm showing you, but there are a number of other studies like this one. So most oncologists and psychiatrists who work with oncologists and oncology patients derive from these kinds of studies the belief that overall stress is not related to whether we develop cancer or not. I actually have a slightly different tack on that question that I'd like to go over with you today. This is a fascinating experiment. Rats are grafted with an aggressive tumor of cancer cells. And then they're being left alone to live their rat life in their rat cage. And what happens is what you see on the left. After about a month of that, 50% of the rats, 54 in fact, have rejected the cancer. Their body has rejected the cancer. They have natural defenses like we do, and they're capable of rejecting the tumors. Then the next group of that experiment, the second bar that you're seeing here, the rats are grafted with the same tumor, but they're now placed in a cage where they get electric shocks at random times during the day. And what happens is, after about a month of that treatment, those rats become quite depressed. So in a sense, you have the impression that these rats have become powerless, helpless. They've given up on life. These rats, interestingly, only about a quarter of them are capable of rejecting the tumors. Now, the most interesting group of rats is the third one. These rats get grafted with the same cancer cells, and they're put in a cage where they get the same number of random electric shocks that the others did. But there's one tiny difference which is critical. They also get a little lever that they learn to press on to avoid getting extra shocks. So they get just as many shocks as the other guys. But they learn that by pressing a lever, they can avoid getting even more shocks, right? Now, what is really interesting is that behaviorally, these rats don't get despondent at all. Now, the most interesting thing about them is that in terms of cancer, if anything, this is not statistically significant, but if anything, they're capable of rejecting tumors better than the rats that are left alone with no shocks at all. What does that mean? This is really intriguing. This could be interpreted as meaning that for some of us there are stressors that are bad stresses for us, because what they do is they make us feel discouraged, make us feel helpless, powerless, and when that lasts too long, that impairs the ability of our natural defenses from fighting back cancer. But there could also be stressors, like we're seeing in the last category of rats, that actually stimulate us. They're challenges of life. And if those stressors actually engage us in life, as opposed to making us feel powerless, it's possible that they may help our defenses fight back cancer better than not having any kind of challenge at all. So now I'm going to take you to what is it in human beings that helps us keep our healthy sense of ourselves, helps us keep a sense of meaning in our life in the face of stressors. It may not be, as it is for rats, a little lever. If you had to guess and think about that, the number one thing that human beings need to ride through the waves of difficulties in their lives is actually connectedness, connection with other human beings. And let me illustrate this for you with a story. Mish was a person I knew who had inflammatory breast cancer, which had been rather aggressive, so she had a bilateral mastectomy. She lost both breasts, which was followed by chemotherapy and radiotherapy. And the treatment was really harsh on her. And when I asked her to describe everything that she went through over the course of her journey, she said that the most difficult time was the moment where she had lost her hair, she'd lost her eyebrows, she'd lost her eyelashes, and she looked at herself in a mirror, and all she could see was a light bulb with eyes. I could just feel the pain when hearing her describe what she'd been through. And so I asked Mish, what is it that helped you the most bear with all this? What gave you strength? She's a very thoughtful person, so she said that she wanted to think about that and get back to me. So she did, and she did get back to me, and I want to read you what the email that she sent me a few days later. It is in my book, and I would not, I would feel very self-conscious to read you something I wrote, so I'm happy that it's something I didn't write. It came directly from Mish. My husband gave me a card early in my illness, which I pinned up in front of me on my bulletin board at work. I read it frequently. Here's what the card said. The cover read, "Open this card and hold it close to you. Now, squeeze." Inside, my husband wrote, "You are my everything. My joy in the morning, even on the days we don't make love. My sexy and warm and laughing mid-morning daydream. My phantom lunchmate. My building excitement at mid-afternoon. My soothing joy at seeing you when I get home. My workout decompressor. My sous chef. My playmate. My lover. My all." The card continued. "It's going to be just fine." He wrote under that, "And I'd be there at your side. Always. Love, PJ." He was by my side every step of the way. His card meant so much to me. and buoyed me throughout my journey. Since you asked, Mish. I wanted to share this with you, knowing that we don't all have PJs in our lives at times when we may need them. Because it so beautifully expresses what helps human beings bear through almost anything. And I want to show you another study which is very comforting when we realize that we can't all have the perfect husband or the perfect wife or the perfect whatever in those situations. So this study is not about mates, husbands or wives, it's about friends. And look at what it tells us. These are 2,800 US nurses with breast cancer. And they went through treatment, and after treatment the researchers asked them how many friends they had in their lives that they felt they could go to under almost any circumstance to ask them for help. And some of these nurses sadly said none. And then some said one or two. Some, in fact, must have been going a lot on the internet and had a lot of online friends, because they said more than 10. You know, I don't know who can have more than 10 real friends, but you can have more than 10 online friends, I imagine. Now, what is interesting here is that, in fact, you don't need to have more than 10. You see, you get the benefit from just one or two. You look at the women who had one or two friends, they had 4 times greater chance of being still alive a few years later than those who said they had none. This is a pretty stunning result. And the good news for many people is that, in fact, having a spouse in that study made no difference at all. So it's not about spouse, necessarily. It's about connecting with a few human beings who you feel will help you through tough times. And clearly, those of us who learn how to do that can do much better physically. It seems like it can contribute to slowing down the cancer growth. This is, in human beings, the equivalent of the little lever for the rat experiments. This is what helps us ride through some of the most difficult stresses of life. I want to end with a last concept, and also, in a way, a thank you note to somebody I care a lot about. Which is the whole idea of finding meaning through the experience, through whatever the journey is that was given to us by destiny. I was still a young psychiatrist at the University Hospital in Pittsburgh, and I was taking care of people who were hospitalized for medical reasons. That was my job as a psychiatrist. And I had known for, I think, 2 or 3 years about my own cancer. When I was called by the neurology service urgently when I was on call, because a young man hospitalized had been told that he had a massive brain tumor and that he probably didn't have more than 6 months to live. And when he learned about that, he rose out of bed, tore off his shirt, showed that he had tattoos from neck down on his arms, both sides, on his back, and was in such a rage that he started taking the furniture and throwing it against the walls. And the nurses, not quite knowing what to do, decided they would call the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist was me. And a few minutes later, we were sitting together on his bed and next to each other, and having a conversation about how that had happened and what was going on in his life before that. And he explained to me that he'd been a biker for a number of years, and he was mostly doing drugs and drinking with his biking buddies, and his life had been going nowhere, and he always had the impression it would eventually start, that he would get it together, and he would make something out of his life. But now he had just been told that after having spent his life in this way, it was now all gone. There would be no time to get it back together. And it was so painful. And it was clear that the most difficult thing for him was to just be spending his last few days on Earth smoking cigarettes and watching television, although there are some great programs on television like this one. And that was so sad and difficult for him. So at some point, I had this glimmer of a thought. I said, was there something you ever knew how to do well that could be of service to other people? He said, well, I did some studies as an electrician about 15 years ago, and I think I could still put together a heating or air conditioning system. That's what I knew how to do. So I told him, well, look, Joe, why don't you go in your neighborhood, see if there's a church or temple or that may need a new air conditioning or heating system, and just you could volunteer to install it for them for free. And he actually did that. And fortunately, the local priest said that was a great idea. And so Joe started to go every day to set up an air conditioning system on the rooftop of that little church in the neighborhood. And something changed. He started coming to our meetings with a smile on his face and to tell me about how he was spending hours and hours on the roof of that church because he was very slow. He couldn't concentrate anymore. And so people noticed him, and after a while, they would wave at him, and he would wave back, and then they would bring lunch to him, probably things he should never have been eating, but I didn't know any better at the time. But they would bring coffee and bagels, and he started feeling very connected with these people. And it's about all I did for him. And then weeks went by, and after a while, I got a call from his neuro-oncologist who said, David, Joe's been back in the hospital for a couple of weeks. We tried another chemotherapy, but it didn't work, and we didn't have much hopes. And now we're going to stop everything and send him to hospice. And I wanted to let you know that if you want to say goodbye, this would be a good time. So I remember very well that morning, on Friday morning, I went up to the neurology floor in the hospital and got to Joe's room, and he was lying very peacefully on white bed sheets, and everything was white in the room and peaceful because they had taken away all the machines around him, no IV lines, nothing. And the sun was coming through the window and bathing us in its light, and I sat next to him, and he saw me and he tried to say something to me, but I couldn't hear. Then he feebly waved at me with his hand to come closer. So I did, and I ended up with my ear on his lips because I couldn't. He was so weak he could barely talk. And then I heard him say to me, "Thank you for saving my life." And I still feel a lot of gratitude to him for having said that to me that day, because I've been hanging on to this for that many years, to this idea that until the very end, it remains always in our power to save our lives and bring it to a meaningful conclusion. So as we end this program, there's one last message I want to share with you. When I wrote this book and when I started to share the information that we discussed today with other people, as a physician, I was worried about perhaps I would be bringing to people false hope. And if there's a risk of spreading false hopes with this information, I wondered. But when told that they can do nothing to help themselves beyond their conventional treatment, many cancer patients live with a sense of powerlessness and hopelessness. And the science that we discussed today shows that, in fact, there are many ways that we can choose to live our lives that will help prevent or fight cancer. This is true hope. And not telling people about these approaches, not giving the message about what each of us can do, conveys a sense of false hopelessness, which ignores the true hope that is out there. So my most sincere wish is that together we're contributing today to spreading this true hope. Thank you very much.
Stonyfield is proud to be the exclusive sponsor of Anti-Cancer. We make pure, organic yogurt. We believe healthy people need healthy food and a healthy planet. You can learn more at stonyfield.com.
Do you want to learn more about the anti-cancer lifestyle? Read Anti-Cancer, A New Way of Life by Dr. David Servan-Schreiber. Little changes can make a big difference. Let Dr. Servan-Schreiber show you how. Find out which products to avoid, improve your diet, learn about exercise, and the benefits of specific mind-body practices, and much more. Read Anti-Cancer, on sale now.